you're going to do it, the audit should be worth it. The problem is, audits are hard. Yet we've issued over 20,000 reports to 2,000 clients worldwide.
The problem is, in the background of that picture, there were some sticky notes on the wall. And those sticky notes had some very sensitive information.
Cybersecurity and compliance will no longer be a mystery. Hey everybody, welcome into our cybersecurity mission. My name is Allie Krings, I'm your host. Today we're sitting down with Duncan Woosley, one of the pen testers here at Kirkpatrick Price. And Duncan, I'm so glad you're sitting down with me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
So we're just gonna start at the very top. What is a pen tester?
So a pen tester is sometimes described as an ethical hacker. Our job is to get into a network, whether already given access or we are trying to find access into a network, and then look through it for security vulnerabilities that we can exploit in combination with other vulnerabilities to gain access to more privilege or data that's going to be an important test for a firm to know how an attacker would perform in their environment.
So when you say ethical hacker, it definitely makes you sound like you're one of the good guys. How do you become an ethical hacker instead of just a hacker?
Well, yeah, that all depends on your contract, right? So when we go in, we have a very well spelled out contract of what we're allowed to do, what we're not allowed to do, and how we're going to perform our attacks. And usually we're going to have the backing of a firm, although there's some contractors that do this as well. We're going to have the backing of a firm that certifies us to do this sort of thing, as well as many professional certificates that have certified our information and our knowledge and how we perform our attacks and tactics.
So today we're kind of going to dig deeper into one of the broader topics of OSINT. So we're just going to start from the top. What is OSINT and why do you use it?
Right, so OSINT stands for Open Source Intelligence. This is intelligence that we can gather open source, right? So out on the internet through open means without already having privilege and without necessarily touching any assets. So this differs from reconnaissance, which is something that's very common on pen tests. Reconnaissance is going to be typically more active. So we're going to go and we're going to scan different hosts on the network to see what they have open, what they're hosting, and that's going to be touching those hosts and asking to interact with them a lot. Open source intelligence differs in that we gather this not only from those hosts that we're targeting, but also the entire internet to find vulnerabilities and find different bits of information that we can use to provide more access or aid us in an attack.
When it comes to doing an audit, why is OSINT such an important part of that?
So for the penetration test side of things, OSINT is going to be very important because that helps us see more things than typical pen tests are going to find. Not all pen tests are going to have OSINT. This is something that we try to do on every pen test, but it is an important piece of the pen test, which is going to be an important piece of that audit, right? So the pen test is generally a requirement of the audit. In that pen test, it helps us identify more things that isn't always seen on typical pen tests.
Well, I think it's really interesting too when you think of OSINT and specifically social media. Obviously, 30 years ago, social media didn't exist.
Right. Yeah.
Even 10 years ago, social media looked so different and people have so many capabilities. Walk us through the part that social media plays in this.
Yeah, and social media is huge just because of, one, the amount of data, but two, the lack of control over that data, right? So you can have, an example I've seen before is when someone has gone to an office and posted a picture and just said, look, no one's here today, right? And the problem is, in the background of that picture, there were some sticky notes on the wall. And those sticky notes had some very sensitive information. And so we can see that's a bit of information. That's an obvious, easy example. But there's a lot of other examples, right? So when we talk about social engineering, how that can be used to help us aid an attack, a social engineering attack, if we have bits of information that someone has posted on social media. This is something that most people wouldn't necessarily know, but we know because we have that information through social media, and then we can use that to almost, in a sense, authenticate ourselves to the person we're talking to and tell that person, oh, we know this information about you. I know this information about your firm, so trust me, right? And that's something that they wouldn't think you'd have access to, but through social media, we can definitely find that.
So walk us through when it comes to using OSINT and you're going through your pen test. What are different social tools that you're using? What are these examples that you're really digging into, and why are they so necessary?
Right. So we're going to use. There's a lot of different tactics. So OSINT is huge. I mean, it's both open source, everything you can find on the internet, but also filtered down to the intelligence side of things and what we can actually use to attack, what actually an attacker would use to attack the client or whatever we're trying to target. And so there's plenty of different different tools we're going to use. One, social media being the biggest. We can talk Facebook, Instagram, Twitter.
Sure.
And LinkedIn is a very big one. And so one of the things we like to do is get an employee directory that way, right? So people like to say, oh, I work for this company. Well, we can find that through LinkedIn oftentimes. And then find a list of employees. Then we can take those employee names, turn it into email addresses, because there's usually a common email address format, and then we can use that for a phishing email. So we can send phishing emails out to every employee that we can find on social media, or plenty of other means that you can use the internet for.
So what are some examples of these attacks?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so one example is phishing is one of the big ones, right? So if we can get a list of email addresses, we can then take those and we see, oh, this company has a retreat coming up. Well, what if we say, we see this retreat posted on their social media that they're doing. We then take that and we turn it into a phishing email where we say, hey, we're doing a sweepstakes at the retreat. Please click this link to sign up for, to qualify for this and give your name or an email address or whatever. And so then we will send that out to the list of employees that we've gathered through social media and then turn that into something that we can potentially get access to the environment with if anyone clicks that link.
So when it comes to, let's say you've sent out one of these phishing emails, okay, and you've got a couple of bytes. How do you go back? Is this something that you pass on to an auditor to say like, hey, X company had several people reach out, submit all their information. Why is that such a big issue, and what's your next step there?
Right, so typically in that pen test report, we're going to put in, here's what we found. Here's the data we found from our reconnaissance, our OSINT. And then here's how we use that in an attack. So the pen test is really important to not only show the data, but then show how that data can be used to attack the client or attack whatever we're targeting. In that case, for phishing, as an example, we then take that and say, well, here's the access we got, here's the passwords or the clicks we got, and here's how we could turn that into access to your internal network.
So when it comes to social media, obviously, most people have it, but then a lot of companies and businesses, they also have their own social media, their social pages. What should they be monitoring, to help prevent from some of these attacks?
Right, yeah, most companies have a policy in place. They have a policy of how you can use social media, what you can post. But not many companies actually check if that policy is being carried out, right? Because it's hard to do, and it is very difficult. So that's a lot of times where we can come in doing our investigations and see, okay, what is being posted? Is it in accordance with your policy? And is your policy strict enough? How can we take this information and turn it into attack? Was that allowed in your policy? Was it not allowed? And then they can take that from there and say, do we need to update our policy or do we need to enforce our policy?
Interesting. Okay, so I know there are so many things that you've done in this role. Walk us through, a couple of examples or something that really stood out to you as one of the more maybe interesting times that you did something.
One really good example is when we were doing spear phishing. So spear phishing differs from regular phishing in that I'm not just blasting this out to a bunch of people. I'm targeting one specific person. And so we were targeting an executive at this one point. And we had looked through their social media and we had found where they had recently received an award. Well, we then looked at the social media and determined, using their LinkedIn, where they went to college. And we took the domain of the college, alumni domain, and we changed it up just slightly so it looks like the same domain, but we changed it. And then we sent them an email and say, hey, we saw you got this reward, and we're acting like we're from their college, their alumni association at their college. And we said, hey, we understand you got this award. Would you be willing to fill out this form? We'd love to interview you about it and post a blog. And so we attached a little file to it, a little PDF file. And the executive got that email, downloaded the file, clicked it, and then there's a little pop-up that says, hey, there could be something malicious on this. If you trust it, go ahead and hit OK. But he thought, I know where I got this from.
It's from my college.
Right. So he clicked OK, and then we got a ping back that he opened our malicious file, and it allowed code execution. Now from there, an attacker could then drop a shell onto their environment and actually start getting access to that computer and hacking the computer and the internal network from there. And especially, this person had a lot of sensitive information as an executive, access to a lot of information, so it's very serious. But we found that all through social media. We used our OSINT, we did a whole background investigation on who this person is, what they've been doing, where they went to college, and then turned that into an attack on them.
Okay, so you've given us a couple examples of spearheading, right?
Yeah, spear phishing.
Spear phishing. But you also talked about, sending like these mass-wide company emails. So whether it's for the retreat and the so-called sweepstakes, or they win this award with their company, how are you coming up with these ideas that could even be attacks? Is there like a big brainstorm behind the scenes?
There usually is. There's a phase of, okay, after we gather as much information we have from this, how could we use this for an attack? And that's where it takes a little experience to know what other attacks are like, and even just some creativity in coming up with, what do you think you'd click? One of my favorite ways actually is to look at emails I've received and say, okay, is this phishing or not? And even if it's not phishing, could this be used as a phishing email? And so there's a couple that I've clicked on before thinking, and they weren't phishing emails.
Did you win
but
awards?
Then I
was that how it happened?
Yeah. And then we can turn that experience into, okay, well, someone else would probably click on this before even thinking about it.
Okay, so I was talking to Joseph Kirkpatrick, of course, the founder here, and we were going through some examples of OSINT, and he shared that using that open source intelligence, you've actually been able to physically get in the building in these pen testing. Why is that an important part of pen testing?
So another aspect of pen testing, a lot of times we're going to be doing a network pen test, an internal network, an external network, or maybe a web application pen test. But sometimes we test the physical aspect of it. So we test the physical security and see where we can get in there too. And one of the important aspects of a physical security test is the social engineering involved with that. And so our social engineering, we're going to go in and we're going to try to mimic someone or some entity that will allow us to get into the building, even though we don't actually have access. And so a very common way of doing that is going on and try to find their vendors. See who comes in to fix our air conditioning. See who comes in to, commonly bring them food, and something like that. And dress up as that person. Tell them, hey, I'm here for this, and can you let me in? And I'm going to try to get in and work around. And then from our perspective, we're going to go in and see if we can plug in a device or something that we can leave and then hack the network from afterwards. One example of that, which I've done recently, is we found a social media post by a completely different company than our target, but they had mentioned our target's name in there and said, "Hey, thank you for being a repeat
just like
client,
a happy client."
This is a catering company, and so we then looked up that catering company, found their uniforms, mimicked their uniforms, and then went in with some food that we ordered from them, but we went into our target's environment and said, "Hey, we've got a food order delivery for you, and would you let us in there?" We're like, "Oh, we don't know who you are," and so from there, then we can try to explain, "Oh, this was new, or this is random. Sorry you didn't understand about this. This was a surprise from someone else." Whatever the case would be, can we drop it in your conference room, set it up, and then if we can have enough time to do that, we can plug in a device and just leave, and now we have access to the internal network.
So is that the kind of end goal here, being able to prove that you can hack if you want to?
Right, yeah, to get access past that exterior, right?
Yeah.
So if we can get inside the actual office, plug something in, then oftentimes we can get in. Now there's other controls that can be in place that can prevent that, and sometimes even just have access to rooms we shouldn't have access to, right? If we can see documents on table, we can take pictures of them with our phone or anything else, that's information that, even though may not allow us to hack the network any further, may still be sensitive. May still be very sensitive information that the client does not want anyone else knowing, and someone could just walk in with the right pretext and get access to that information.
So when you say you're mimicking these outfits, you're not literally putting logos on or truly getting maybe the same red collared shirt or anything like that.
We can sometimes, yeah. If you can get one close enough, you can do that. You can get a Verizon shirt that looks just like it.
That's crazy.
And then you can walk in, and they should authorize you. They should say, okay, we'll check and make sure you're allowed. But not everyone does that. And oftentimes they don't do that if you fit the description, if you look the part, right?
Yeah.
And not many people will question you for that. And so that's what we're testing. Your policy of checking the people when they come in, checking if they're allowed. Are you actually upholding that, or are you just day to day? People don't think about that a lot of times.
So when it comes to OSINT, you've been talking about how it's such a broad topic. What are some things that you think maybe might be a misconception or people don't know a lot about, and why do you think they're so important?
Like I said, OSINT and Recon differ a little bit. Recon's more active, and a lot of pen tests just focus on Recon, and they don't really get into the broader OSINT to see, okay, what's on social media, what's posted that on social media or just on blogs that you didn't want out there, and then even what resources did you think were locked down and actually weren't. Those are not always checked for. So one of the big misconceptions is the difference between Recon and OSINT. OSINT being a lot broader, taking the whole internet into account there. Versus Recon being more active.
When it comes to, I think, social media, there are so many different things that people are doing these days, like tagging their location, or of course, maybe you do go get a great coffee at, tons of coffee joints, right? And you tag at them. Is that something that we should still be doing, or businesses should be doing?
Yeah, and that's hard. That depends on the business policy, and then we want to come in and show you how an attacker could use this. And then the business can make the decision of, okay, should we allow this? Should we not allow this? How should we enforce this? And so one thing, we talk about tagging your location at restaurants or whatnot. A lot of places have badge cards that let you enter. And sometimes we can get a cloner device to get close enough to those badge cards and steal that badge card code. So, if we know where someone goes to coffee every day, we can sit there and wait for them to come in, scan their badge card when they're not paying attention, and then leave, and then later go in with a valid clone of their badge card and get access to the building.
Wait a second. This feels like walking directly into a spy movie or something. There's actual technology that's meant for you to hack these physical locations.
Right. Yeah, there is quite a bit into hacking, especially those RFID cards that let you get access to the building. More modern networks have a couple different ways of protecting that, but a lot of times those attacks can still happen, especially with those older cards.
Here at Kirkpatrick Price, there has been so much fun being part of our cybersecurity mission, and I do want to invite you. I think OSINT is such an interesting topic. So if you're at home saying, I have more questions for Duncan, I want to ask him about this, I want you to go to kirkpatrickprice.com/podcast, check the show notes. You can always submit those questions. But I'm sure you get asked a million questions about this job because it really is kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah.
What are probably the most common questions that you get?
Yeah, so people, the biggest thing is that legal? The biggest question is always, is that legal to hack a network? How are you ethical? And that's why we talk about the contract. This is why we have a contract. Right. This is why it's very spelled out. People know about this beforehand. We don't just go in randomly and do this, right? And so that's probably the biggest question I get asked: is this legal? And the second is, how do you even do that? How do you train for that? How do you do that? And a lot of that comes in on-the-job experience, combined with some professional certificates that have certified that knowledge, right? So we try to, as pen testers, strive for quite a few professional certificates that say, I am certified in doing this. I can prove I have the knowledge to do this sort of attack, to do this pen test, to do this. Whatever we're doing at that time.
It's interesting that you talk about the experience on the job because I think, especially with experience, you learn so much. But social media is changing rapidly. The internet is changing rapidly, which also means OSINT is going to be changing rapidly. Right, so walk me through some of the challenges that you do see when new social media comes out or new information is now available.
Yeah, and that is a huge topic. It's a good question because it changes almost every day. I think I had a tool last week that worked and doesn't work this week.
Wow.
And so you got to stay on top of what sites are out there that let you get the information you want. Can you get domain information? That changes a lot. If we can find a client's domain that they use for their website or use for their email, how's that connected to other domains? There's some tools out there that can do that, but they're going to get taken down. They're going to change. They're not going to allow that functionality. So we like to have lots of tools. We like to use a couple different tools, and sometimes one of those tools that we use, one of those websites or whatever, it is not going to give us all the information we need, or it's not going to give us accurate information. So we like to check that against multiple sources. And so staying on top of the tools and techniques is a full-time job. It really does. It takes a lot of work to stay on top of that. And there's a lot of people out there, speaking of social media, that actually can be a big help too. There's a lot of people that will post, here's all the list of tools I use on social media. Twitter's a really big one for this. People like to post on Twitter, this site's down now, we're using this site now. And here's a different attack that we found, or a different technique that we found for extracting information using OSINT. And Twitter, as well as many other social medias, is really big for that.
So obviously when you think of social media, some of the big ones would be like Facebook or Instagram, of course Twitter. What about some of the just chat rooms or things like Reddit? Is that something that you dig into?
Yeah, chat rooms is big too. A lot of people, especially on chat rooms, think they're anonymous by I'm not using my real name, I'm anonymous. But oftentimes if you're using the same icon, you're using the same image, your profile image on this site that you are in your email, we can reverse search that image, see where else it's been used, and then find an email address, and then we can link that email address to a person using another site that can link that information. Or even the username. The same thing with the username. If you're using the same username here, you are here, and then we can use that username to find more information about that person and track them back to an actual person at our target organization.
Okay, so how long have you been at Kirkpatrick Price?
So I've been at Kirkpatrick Price 3 going on 4 years.
Okay, what is one of your goals that you have, as you're here, or even when you start a pen test with a company, what are some of those goals look like?
Yeah, it's so hard, especially with OSINT, because you don't necessarily know what you're getting until you get into it. As a pen tester, I always want to get domain admin. I want to get the most privilege I can possible. I want to get access to the SQL databases as much as I can. But from the OSINT perspective, it's a lot more difficult to know what's going to be useful to me until you can look at the whole broad picture of what's all the information out there and how can we condense us into an attack that gets us access to their network or access to their data that we shouldn't have access to.
Well, awesome. Well, Duncan, the first thing I want to say is thank you. This was so interesting, so fun. Did you have fun?
Yeah, this is good.
Would you do it again?
Oh yeah, I'd love to. I love talking about OSINT. I mean, again, there's so much here. I could go on a long time getting into breach data or getting into tracking other information through multiple sources is super fun.
Okay, wait, can we just talk about breach data really quick? Because I feel like all the time in the news we're seeing things like that.
Right.
So I do want to remind you guys, if there's specific topics or specific things you're interested, go to kirkpatrickprice.com/podcast, check the show notes, you can submit some of those questions. But breach data is always, a buzzword or like a news headline.
Yes.
Walk us through what your role has something to do with that.
Yeah, so breach data is hard because it's in a bit of a gray area with how we can use it. So we have to be very careful on how we can use this data and especially where we can get it from, which can be difficult to say the least. But breach data is coming out all the time. These companies getting breached. They're dropping a list of all their users that have ever logged into their site. And a lot of times people have used their corporate email address to log into the site gets breached. Well, now we have not only your corporate email address, we have a password that you've used or a password hash that we can sometimes crack and then try to use. If you've reused that password, we can try to use that and log in at your actual organization to get into it. Or even more, we can find your IP address. And now we can see, okay, this is the IP address they use their corporate email from. That might be an IP address that's linked to that company. And now we know, let's search for all the IP addresses and all the breaches of that specific IP address and see if we can find any other hits to find more employees and more data on those employees. And it quickly turns into this web of, once you start linking all these breaches together, linking little bits of information of, okay, this domain, we know they use this domain, and they use this IP address. And then maybe they reuse this password. How can we link all of that together to build a picture of gathering as much information as we can? And breach data is huge for that. I mean, there's so much breach data coming out all the time. I think the last I heard, someone was able to collect nearly 10 terabytes in 1 week of new data that came out.
So you mentioned passwords really quick, and I know even on my work laptop, right, about every 6 weeks or so, it's like, hey, your password's going to expire.
Right.
How important is that for companies actually?
Yeah, so I mean, if a company gets breached, right, and they've used the same, and let's say an employee in that company and a company signs up for another company with a password, and that other company gets breached. Well, that password is now public. If they reuse that password on their own environment, then it's something that we could reuse and try to log in there. Now, if that password has changed, in 6 months or however long, then that password's different, and now we can't use it. But a lot of times we see that where someone will change it from spring 2023 and now it's summer 2023 and they change it to summer 2023. And when we look at that, we can see, oh, there's a pattern here, or they just increase the number by 1. we can see the pattern, and that's why that important password complexity is so important, because we can find your old passwords, almost guaranteed. In breach data, it's almost guaranteed we're going to find an old password that someone has.
Okay, we're going to do an entire podcast episode just on breach data. I can already tell right now. But Duncan, I want to say thank you so much for sitting down with us today. I appreciate it. And for my friends at home, I do invite you, go online, kirkpatrickprice.com/podcast, check the show notes. You can submit questions. You can check out all of today's episode resources. But as for me, my name is Allie Krings, and I look forward to sitting down with you guys next time on our cybersecurity mission. When you work with a Kirkpatrick Price cybersecurity auditor, you work with someone who's been in your shoes. Let's see what the next expert is ready to share to support you in your cybersecurity mission.
Hello, my name is Kaiser Clark. I'm a penetration tester at Kirkpatrick Price. I think pen testing is a vital aspect in information security, because at the end of the day, information security and cybersecurity is about stopping threat actors. And what better way to test your security controls than to get someone who thinks like a threat actor into your organization and actually test your controls. I always tell people different attack paths into networks and even into buildings and stuff like that. And a lot of people will tell me, hey, I didn't think about that. It's like, well, cyber criminals did think about that, and I'm thinking about that, and that's what makes it a good test.
Today's episode highlights the need for penetration testing to achieve our challenging compliance goals. An ethical hacker can put your defenses through an exercise to find problems before the attackers do. Are you ready to join a community of 10,000 people who are working together to elevate the standards for cybersecurity and compliance? It's free to sign up at kirkpatrickprice.com/podcast or check the show notes and achieve greater levels of assurance today. Thanks for joining us on our cybersecurity mission.